Yes, we are live. Hi, happy Tuesday, besties and bosses. How are you doing? How was your weekend? I'm all like, I took a long weekend. It was my husband and my second wedding anniversary, but 9 years together. So, whatever you want to call that. And we had a long weekend. This is not what our live stream is about at all this weekend. We actually got married twice because we got married during COVID and we couldn't get a wedding license in New York City. So, we got unofficially married a year ago yesterday in Central Park, and then we got officially married. We'll be this Friday in Carmel, California, on the beach. So we figured we should have two celebrations. So we took a long weekend this past weekend in the city and went to this beautiful spa, went to all the galleries, and then we're gonna have another weekend this weekend to have a second celebration because why the fuck not? So that's what we did. I also let me see if I can pull myself up because it always takes a second while we're doing that. But that's not what we're talking about today. But we decided to have a staycation. We usually take a trip this time of year, but we didn't know SAG was going to go on strike. My husband's an actor, and usually he gets acting work this time of year. He actually got an audition, so we decided to do more of a staycation. So we had we just did like New York things, and we're going to this upcoming weekend as well. So it feels very fitting for our conversation today because I also last week celebrated my 10 years in New York City, and I'm going to share why this is a big deal. It might not sound like a big deal to some of you, but it's such a big deal. But I also built my business here in that time from zero and struggling to six figures, and then double that and then triple that to about 350K, 365K a year plus with room to scale. And I want to both celebrate the move, but also there's some really core lessons in that. There's some things that really allowed me to both move here and not get kicked out of New York City, to make it here, as they say, and also to build my business here. That's what we're going to dig into today. Let me just see if I can make sure we're live, because I always want to see your comments, and it's a bummer to me when I can't. So I'm very bad at multitasking, as you know. So while I'm doing that, I will share what our giveaway is and some reminders for you. There we are. Okay, I can see myself, so we don't have to be distracted. And then we'll dive into the juicy stuff. So giveaways, reminders. Giveaways. If you join me live, leave me a comment, leave me an emoji, say hi. This is one of those conversations I really want to have with you because I think there's a couple mindsets, perspectives that supported me so much, and it's the same thing that supports me now in business that I know supports my clients as well, that I want you to have access to. So I want you to be here for this conversation, plus I'm just having fun. So we're giving away one full-length coaching session, a 100K CEO mindset and strategy session. I rarely give away full-length sessions. Yes, we do mini sessions from time to time, but it's a full-length session. And leave me a comment. You will get entered to win into that. So that is our giveaway today. And the other reminder for you, if you did not catch last week's masterclass, the Path to Consistent 10K Months, I think it was one of my best. Sincerely, this isn't me like doing the marketing thing. I've heard from so many of you how valuable it was, how normalizing it was, how permission giving it was, how much it simplified business for you. I've had some really lovely comments. Thank you to all of you, by the way. It means a lot to me because I care a lot about what we share with the group. That will not stay up in the group. We might turn it into an evergreen masterclass of full transparency. You might get access to it again, but for right now, if you want to get access to that will stay up in the group until the 11th of October. If you want to sign up, you can still get access to the bonus playbook. I also announced a special on the masterclass, and I will share it with you all here because it feels just fair to be transparent around this. I have not offered an incentive like this, I think, in 4 years in my business. I think. Don't quote me. I might be like forgetting a time. But if you decide to join me for a coaching intensive or one of my upcoming availabilities for a one-on-one coaching spot, and you book in your consultation or your free call by October 11th for a spot through the end of the year. And I have limited spots through the end of the year. So this isn't like free for all. It's like this is until we book out through December. Once I start booking for January, this no longer applies. I'm offering you $250 off either my coaching intensive or that first month of your coaching. So again, that's only through October 11th, but I want you all to know as well. So I'm not like keeping this from a select group of people, but I do really want you to watch that masterclass because I think it was super valuable and it will not be up forever. But if you've been thinking about working with me, if you've been thinking about booking an intensive, who knows, I might offer an incentive like this again. I don't foresee that since it's been about 4 years since I have. So now's a really great time. That being said, don't jump on this just for the incentive, but if you've sort of been thinking about it or curious about it, now's a great time to take me up on that. Again, you just need to book your consultation by October 11th or call with me. I do require a call before we work together to make sure that we're a fit. And then as long as you book from there for one of my limited spots through the end of the year. So I only have limited spots through the end of December. Again, spots in January will no longer apply to that, and I foresee those getting booked up. So that is all the things. And as you're joining now, say hi, leave me an emoji, say, let me know you're here, and you'll be entered to win that free coaching session. Now let's dig into the conversation I want to have today. So I'm going to just set the tone here. I know many of you do not live in New York City. You could probably give two shits about living in New York City, but I want to give a little context and then really parallel this to business, because there's three main nuggets here I want to dive into in terms of mindset and strategy that really supported me, that I think is so important for us as business owners, and I just see the parallel there. So just to set the tone, for those of you who are like, Kim, I'm new to your world, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. I live in New York City. I have now been here 10 years in New York to be considered a New Yorker by I don't know who they is, but they say you need to live here 10 years to be considered a New Yorker, which I think I wrote a post about this in the group. I used to fucking eye roll that so hard. I was like, what? Like, I've been a New Yorker since I've moved here. I pay this rent, I pay the taxes, but we're going to talk about that a little bit in terms of why I now, 10 years later, actually understand that a whole lot more. And I think that's so analogous to business, because I think we come into business and we're like, I've been a business owner for 2 seconds. Of course I'm an entrepreneur. And for those of you who have been around a little longer, it's not that we're hating on anyone who's newer to business. Of course, that's so celebration worthy, but you literally do become a different version of yourself. You do step into a different identity when you truly become a business owner and you've gone through a couple hurdles and a couple seasons, right? You're just a different version of yourself. So we're going to talk about a little bit about that. But I moved here 10 years ago. I officially became a New Yorker last week, but I also built my business here. And I think what I would say is, please, everyone, do not hear this as this is the way to build a successful business. I think this is probably the most ass-backwards way to go about it, because this is one of the most expensive cities in the world. It is a challenging city. Not everything needs to be hard to create results. Like, I think in some ways I made it harder than I needed it to be. And in other ways, I think this city really lit a fire under my ass to step into becoming the version of myself I needed to be a CEO and to create success. And that's what we're going to talk about. And so I'm like celebrating. I love New York City. I'm celebrating that I'm officially a New Yorker, but I'm really celebrating who I've had to become. And it's the same in business, because I built this business when I moved here and I'd started over, and I moved into an apartment I couldn't afford. I moved here with no job, right? I literally moved here with no job. I had some money saved up and I was told I wouldn't be able to find an apartment. I was told that I wouldn't be able to pay the bills. I was told all of these things. And when I moved here, I not only found an apartment, I found 4 within a day and a half in the neighborhood I wanted to live in, and I found like 6 surveying jobs. I broke into the advertising industry, and then I built my business and went from struggling to 6 and multi-6 figures. So that's sort of the, hey Sarah, nice to have you. Oh my God, you live in New York City. Oh my God, joking. Yeah, you know, because you've been hanging out with me, but there will be people who are new to this, even though I talk about New York all the time, who are like, wait, what? For any of you who've ever come to New York City, like, it's like the best city in the world, I think. And I think it is also one of the most challenging cities in the world. And I think that's the parallel, and then I will actually dig into the mindsets here. But I think that's the parallel to business, right? For all of us who are entrepreneurs, Sarah, as an actress, right, as a creative, for all of us who are creatives, for all of us who are doing this work, I think all of us would say this is the best thing in the world, right? I would not trade being an entrepreneur for anything. And I think it's so easy for people on the outside looking in to be like, oh, must be nice. Like, that's the best thing ever. You get to like work from home, make great money, work with people you like. It's so easy. And it is easeful, but it's easy. Again, look in New York City, like, that's the greatest city in the world. Why wouldn't you want to live there? And to miss some of the nuance of this is also it's a really expensive city. It's a really challenging city. It's a really competitive city. It will kick your ass left ways. What's that saying? Like front ways, backward. It will kick your ass and chew you up and spit you out and see, do you still want to stick around? And I think that happens for us in business as well. And no one wants to say that. Or if you're creative, right? When I was in LA, it was the same thing when you were acting. We just want to say like, this is this shiny thing and you should just like dream about it and then get this and like ignore all the unshiny stuff. And if it is anything other than shiny, you're doing it wrong or you're not hacking it. And the truth is, for most of us, anything worth wanting, not to say things have to be hard or grueling or harder than they need to be, but there usually are some shadow side, some challenges to work through. And I think that's what New York represents. And I think it's the same for all of us as business owners. I hope this will be a celebration for you as a business owner. And then we'll talk around some of the things that help me not get chewed up and spit out in New York or in business. Because I've been in business now for 7.5 years. And we now make multi-6 figures when before I was making like $500 a month. Sarah says it really is the best city. I mean, I am biased. I'm very biased, y'all, but I mean, there's a reason I've lived here for 10 years. I think, what is it, Lin Miranda Manuel, oh my gosh, why am I flaking on how to say his name? It is, I wrote this down for myself. Lin-Manuel Miranda says this in Hamilton, but he literally has a song where he's like, this is the greatest city in the world. And I co-sign. Okay, but let's talk mindset. So the first thing that really allowed me to make it in New York as a New Yorker after 10 years, right? It's the song, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, and there's a great Jay-Z song as well. And I actually pulled the lyrics up in the email for this, so I will say them, because before I moved to New York, I had a going away party, and we played Jay-Z's song. And the lyrics are, I'm the new Sinatra, and since I made it here, I can make it anywhere. Yeah, they love me everywhere. And I think there is that's the same thing for you in business, right? We think this, I think that's almost like our theme song. And then there's this point in which now 10 years later and 7.5 years later in business, I'm like, oh, that's no longer this thing that like amps me up. Or I'm like, yeah, I can do it. Or I'm like, that's just my reality. And that's what I want for all of you in business. Okay. I've prepped the shit out of this. Let's dig into the mindsets. So one of the mindsets that allowed me to make it is and this is how you guarantee success in your business. I will never say like, I could guarantee results, but this is the mindset that makes your results inevitable. And this is the mindset that I think is one of the things that serves me so well in business and has served me in New York City and a decade acting before is I decided before I got on the plane, before I landed here, I decided I was all fucking in and not going back. So I love LA, right? Not like I'm never going to go back to visit, but I didn't do this thing where I was like, well, let's just like see how New York City goes and like give it a test and like, I don't know, if it doesn't work out, I'll like go back or I'll do this. Or of course, that if I fell on my face and I needed to, I could always go back or start over somewhere else. But that's not the mindset that sets you up for success. And I see this in business all the time, right? We start business or we have a launch or we put an offer out and we're like, well, I'm just gonna like see how this goes or like just give this a try or just kind of like dabble in this thing. And that's such a different mindset from deciding, no, I am burning the fucking boats. Right? There's no backup plan. There's no fallback plan. There's no like, well, maybe this doesn't work. I'll do something else. Or like, let me just dabble in this or let me just try this. Right? Trying is a very trying thing. I say that to my husband all the time. One of my favorite sayings is trying is so trying in terms of like mentally trying. Don't try, decide, right? And of course you're going to be trying and of course you might fall on your face, but I think we get so scared to commit and make a decision because we're so scared that then we're going to fail or then it's going to be hard and what does that mean about us or what are we going to do? But then we're failing by default ahead of time. I'm pretty sure if I had moved to New York City with the mindset of let me just see how this goes, not only would I have not moved into my dream apartment in a neighborhood where I had zero business moving into because you have to prove you make 40 times the rent to get approved for an apartment, and I moved here with no job. So riddle me that, right? Like you can't do that if you're sort of like, well, let's see how this goes. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have broken into the advertising industry with no background, no experience, and now people had far more experience than me in that job. I'm pretty sure when I started my business and I could barely pay the rent and a cup of coffee, that is not an exaggeration, I would have given up in 3 months because I would have been like, I'm trying this and it's not working, right? That's not the mindset that gives you success. The mindset that gives you success is deciding ahead of time, I am doing this, I am playing full out, there is no fucking backup plan, I am going to make this work, and then trusting that in advance so that when the inevitable shit hits the fan, and I will share a funny story with y'all, as I've probably shared before, right? Then it's not like, oh, see, here's the evidence that it just didn't work. Let me go back to where I came from, or let me go back to my old job, or let me go do something else, or let me give up, or let me decide this is the evidence that I suck. It's just like, cool, so this happened, what are we gonna do about it? And I have to say, I think that's one of the few reasons that I made it in New York after 10 years. Like, look, 10 years later, like now New York feels like a piece of cake to me. Like, this is the easiest city in the world to live in. And I have to be like, oh, let's just remember our first years here. And again, not that we're saying success has to be hard or that you have to grind it out. I do not want to communicate that. But there's just a learning curve for everything we do. There's a learning curve in a city like New York. There's a learning curve when you start a business. There's a learning curve if you're breaking into a new industry. There's a learning curve if you're launching something for the first time. There's a learning curve if you're an artist and you're getting on stage or in front of the camera for the first time. And I think we just do ourselves such a disservice when, like, I'm going to be the one person who doesn't need a learning curve, but I'm also not going to fully decide and commit. I'm just going to see how this goes. Right? Like, I think that's just so backwards, and we just set ourselves up then for disappointment, as opposed to just embracing the fact that there is a learning curve for everything. And again, that doesn't mean you have to grind it out or it has to be miserable. I loved my first couple of years in New York City. I loved my so-called struggle bus years in business. I loved them so much. I loved every second of those years. I use that term very lovingly. Right? But they just were more of a challenge, where it's just so much easier now. But it's easier now because I embraced that challenge and I decided in advance of that challenge it was going to work out. So I allowed myself to stay in New York City, allowed myself to stay in business long enough to get the results on the other side, to get the learning curve, right? To get the growth to where it then does become easeful. Is that making sense, y'all? I'm curious thoughts if that is resonating, if that's landing, if you've experienced that. I use the gym as the example for this all the time. I will be going to spin class tonight, right? And it is so fun and it's so easy for me. And I can like dance on the bike and it looks like it's effortless. But the reason that's the case is at one point I had to decide I was going to try spin and I was going to learn, even though I had no idea what the F I was doing, right? And that I was just going to commit fully until I got good at it. And I've just been doing it for a long time, and it used to be that I was winded, and it used to be that it was so hard, and it used to be that I came home with bruises because I was like, what am I doing on this bike, right? And so now it looks like I'm super fast and I'm super coordinated and I like can do all these moves on the bike because I first had to decide to go all in and commit and kind of be willing to ride through that. So Sarah, thank you. Sarah says, yes, this makes perfect sense. So yes, this is sort of like the secret to making it in New York City, but this is the secret to making it in business. And what I will say with this, and I think the spin class is one example, but I think this is more like the New York City business thing, because I think that's a little bit more of like, we get that, like you have to put in the reps. But what is true for when I moved to New York and what is true in business are two things that I think are worth speaking to. That doesn't mean that I wasn't scared shitless, and that doesn't mean that I wasn't, like I didn't land here and think, what the fuck did I just do, right? I remember when I moved to New York, so I was very determined. I very much have an attitude and a mindset of when someone tells me I can't do something. I think I did a story on Instagram around this where I get a little bit like, wait, you're saying I can't do this? Excuse me? Just watch me. So I am a little bit of, I don't know what that would make me, a rebel, an asshole. I do have a little bit of that kind of a mindset. So I remember not only did certain people just like wonder what the heck I was doing, because when I moved, I lived in LA. I had a beautiful home in the Hollywood Hills. I had a great car. I had a good serving job that paid me really well. Like I was set up. I had a great group of friends. It's not like I was leaving LA to run away. I was leaving because I really wanted to live in New York and to experience the city, and because I just really felt like I was ready to make a change, and LA was so around one industry. I felt like it would be really hard for me to see the forest for the trees or be open to new ideas and experiences if I stayed in the same place. And I was in some, I think, just toxic life situations that I wanted to just make myself, give myself a chance to really reset patterns. Not that you need to know all that backstory, but it's not like I was leaving something crappy when I moved here. And so lots of people were like, what are you doing, Kim? Like, do you have any idea how hard New York is? And I remember so many people, especially with the moving part, they're like, it's going to be impossible to get an apartment. When I moved here, it's a little different than the market now. It was literally like, you had to come with like almost a suitcase of money and sign on the dot, because there were so many people there was just more, there was more demand than supply, like to the extreme. You also had to pay a broker. It was a whole thing. And particularly the neighborhood I wanted to live in was at that time West Village, was one of the expensive, nicest neighborhoods, and everyone was like, no, you need to like look way out in Queens. Like don't kid yourself. Nothing wrong with Queens. I love me some Queens. I just happened to really want to move to this neighborhood. Anyway, so I had this mentality of like, watch me, I'm going to make this happen. But I also remember, so I landed and I was like, I'm going to find an apartment and I'm going to hit the ground running. And so I ended up getting approved on 4 apartments in a day and a half. I'm very proud of myself because I do feel a little bit like, see y'all, you can make shit happen when you put your mind to it and you have a strategy and you have a plan and you take action. And I remember the first apartment I went to go look at, I walked in and this was 10 years ago, y'all. So inflation, all of that. 10 years ago, I think it was $2,300 a month for a shoebox. Like it was in a crap neighborhood. It wasn't in the neighborhood I wanted to live in. It was like kind of sketchy. I remember it was I just remember I walked in. I was like, there wasn't even a closet. I was like, is there a bathroom in here? It was one of those where I walked in and I don't know, that's still a lot of money, but 10 years ago, like you have to put in context what that was, especially moving with no rent. Anyway, I just remember leaving that apartment and I started crying. And I was like, what the fuck have I done? Like I sold my car. I got rid of my apartment. I quit my job. Even if I wanted to go back, I literally burned the boats. It's not like I could just move back, hop on a plane the next day and like pick up what I had left off. And I remember just thinking where I was just like, what in the actual F have I done? Like that. And it was just one of those like those moments. But here's the reason I'm sharing this with you, aside from walking down memory lane, because I also had made the decision that I was all in and I was making this work no matter what, and because I was backing myself and because I trusted myself and because I just was like, this is what we are doing, we are making this work. There are millions of people here. I am not the only person who has done this before. I'm a smart cookie, right? Even if shit is hard, like I can figure this out, even if I don't know what this looks like. Because I had that mindset, of course something was going to come up and be scary or make me feel a little bit like, oh my gosh, because that's human. The same way in business, right? You can make this full decision and back yourself, but that doesn't mean when you're in the middle of launch and you've had one sign up and you're a week in and you're hearing crickets, right, that you're not going to have a momentary drop in your stomach and think, what did I just do? Or when you start your business and it's harder than you thought to book that first paying client or to make the money you want, right? It doesn't mean that your brain doesn't kick in, but the difference is what's the mindset behind that, because that makes or breaks you. If I had had the mindset of I'm just going to see how this works, or I'm just going to see how this feels, or let's just see if I can like manifest this and like let's just see if there's some signs for me, right? I would have probably lasted a week, or I would have lasted a year sleeping on someone's sofa or something and then gone back home. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it would be very different than how it played out. And that's why I wanted to share that, like, because I think we think when you've decided, when you've gone all in, when you don't have a fallback plan, when you burn the boats, so to say, not to say you have to burn all the boats. I'm not recommending this is the way y'all do things, but I think we think when we have that mindset, that means that then you're not going to be scared, then you're not going to have a moment of doubt, then you're not ever going to have a challenge, that everything is just smooth sailing. And I want to offer, it's like, no. Anything like this where there is a learning curve and you want a big juicy result that is essentially asking you to do things and to become someone that you are not currently, right? To become a New Yorker, to become a business owner. If you are currently not a New Yorker, you are currently not a business owner, that is asking you to step into becoming something new, to step into a new level of mind, a new way of being, a new way of thinking, a whole new learning curve. Of course, there's going to be challenges. Like, I think it's just wild for us to think that there aren't. But that's when, if you have the mindset of, but I have fucking decided and I am all in and this is happening for me, no ifs, ands, or buts. Of course, like permission to change your mind if you don't like something, but I think that's a very different conversation. Then when the inevitable scaries pop up, then when the inevitable challenges, I think I shared this on a podcast, maybe a live stream, stop me if I've shared this with you, but fast forward a couple years later, when I went to, I was looking, maybe it was about a year later, I wanted to get a job. I thought what I was meant to do was work in advertising. Like, made sense with my background in acting, and I thought I was meant to be a director's rep, which is representing directors as an agent. It's a lot of relationship building and marketing and sales. So you can see why that, to me, would seem like that would make sense, and how I kind of ended up in this world. And I didn't know anyone in that industry. I took 40 coffee meetings to even break into the industry to try to get some interviews, because it's all about who you know. And on the way to, I finally gotten an interview for a job, and you can't make this shit up. I'm in my overpriced little studio apartment getting ready for this interview, and there's water dripping on my head. I did share this on a live because I'm having a flashback to talking about this, but I'll just, for those of you who haven't heard me share this. And there's water dripping on my head. I'm like, what is this? I go to my interview. When I come home, my entire bathroom ceiling has caved in to the, the whole thing has caved in. And that was literally sewage, shit water, that have fallen in my hair before I went to my interview. You can't make this stuff up. So the reason I'm sharing this is not to say everything has to be hard, or your ceiling's gonna fall in, or building and growing a business has to be the equivalent to that. And I think there is something really interesting to say, or just to acknowledge that sometimes things fall apart right before they fall together. Sometimes we have to have a contraction before we have an expansion. Sometimes we need to be given the lessons that we can grow from to get the things we want. And usually the bigger the goal, the bigger the dream, the bigger the shift, the more things that either have to shift and rearrange, or the more things we have to grow and learn through, or the more hurdles, not because things have to be so hard, but because we are literally shifting our entire way of being or thinking, and we need some of these things to allow for that to happen. And so it's crazy for us to think those won't come up. And so anyway, this comes back to this mindset. I think this is where it's the difference between, have you decided this gets to work for you? Have you decided the results are yours no matter what? Have you decided you're all in? Or if you have the mindset of, I'm just going to see how this works out. I'm just going to give this a try. I'm just going to kind of like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. If I had had that mindset when shit water landed on my head, and I'm a germ freak, y'all, beyond no others, and my ceiling caved in, and I'm trying to like break into a new industry, and you know what I mean? Like, there's no way I'd still be here 10 years later, right? I would just be like, just like if you are sort of like, well, let's just like have 1 foot in, 1 foot out of your business, and like the first time a client gets mad at you, or someone defaults on their payment, or doesn't pay you, or asks for a refund, or someone leaves you a shitty comment online, or right, or you have a launch that doesn't go the way you want, or the wrong link goes out. All of the things that can happen, not to create stories to say everything has to be harder than it's going to be, but of course your brain's going to be like, well, that is evidence that this is not for me, as opposed to, well, we're all in. There's no going back. So how do we grow from this? How do we learn from this? How do we problem solve this? How do we figure this out? So, all right, I'm gonna stop talking about shit water, but that really did happen. My first couple of years here were special, y'all. And I think this is actually, I'm being silly here and being very glib, but I think this is really important to say with this mindset. And I loved every second of it. Sure, when I like first had that moment of like, what did I do? When we were talking about the apartments, what I did do is I pulled myself together, and then I got excited, and then I just told you earlier that I found 4 apartments and got approved in 4 apartments in a day and a half. That was apartment 1. Then I went and looked at a bunch of others, right? I think because of this mindset, when that shit water fell on my head, I went and had a great interview that led to meeting someone who was eventually my boss, right? I loved every second of that. I mean, I didn't love the shit water in my hair that I had to wash my hair like 16 times to get that out, just because of my own germ freakedness. But big picture, because of that mindset and because I was all in, and it was such a mindset of like, this is such an exciting journey, and I am just so gonna figure this out. Yeah, there were those moments, but I sincerely look back on those early years in New York City and in my business, and I was like, they were just the best. Like, it was so fun figuring out the first time I made my website, and the first time I remember the first time I had like my first workshop I did with I think 13 people, and I remember the first opt-in I did and like how exciting it was the first time someone signed up. I remember my first tripwire that was $7, and how exciting. I think it is still so exciting to me when I get money from a stranger and it's like $7 or $27, right? Like, that stuff was still exciting. So I want you to see the bothness there. I think if the whole time my mindset had been like, I'm deciding, I'm all in, there's no backup plan, but also I'm miserable and I'm not enjoying any of this, I think we'd be having a very different conversation today. And I wouldn't be telling you this is the greatest city in the world or that I love my business so much. Okay, let's go on to the next one, because otherwise I'll just like memory lane this. And I do have 2 other mindsets and shifts that I wanted to share. So this is the expansive belief that helped me, in air quotes, start at the top, and how I've carried this into business, and how I've really seen this mindset support me to have the success I do in business, to work with the kinds of clients I do, to make the kind of money I make. I work with many clients who make far, far more money than me. My first year in business, when I was making hundreds and thousands per month, I supported my first client to $1 million plus. I've always had clients who are both at the beginning. I mean, I work now with clients who are brand new to business, but I've always had clients who are on paper more successful than me or make more money than me. And I think this is a big part of what's allowed me to do that, is this mindset. And it really is the mindset of, I can start at the top. And I'm going to explain what I mean, because I think that sounds really like maybe conceited, and I don't mean it that way at all. But I think this is a mindset that I think it served me in acting. I think it served me for getting that apartment we talked about. but I think it serves me in business. And I think a lot of what I coach clients around, I think a lot of people really have the opposite mindset of how do I start at the bottom? I feel like I'm at the bottom, and how do I start at the bottom and then like figure things out? And I think that's a really tough way to go about creating anything you want in life. So let me explain, see if I can figure out what I like articulate this in the way that I mean. So I mean this more as a mindset versus an expectation, meaning I didn't literally start at the top in New York City. Obviously, we just talked about this. I didn't literally start at the top in my business. In fact, I think I'm someone who is very, very willing to pay my dues, so to say. I've shared many times. I did 100 free coaching sessions. I worked with 3 clients in a 3-month container for free before ever putting $1 behind my coaching. I wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing, that I was getting client results. So when I say start at the top, I do not mean like an entitlement and like an I deserve it and like I just get to bypass the requirements that give you experience or that allow you to be in integrity or that give you experience. I don't mean that at all. I really mean this more from the mindset of what is it that I want and how can I start by reaching for the top versus think I'm not allowed to want that and set my sights on something that feels really attainable or even below attainable so that I can like self-protect and avoid disappointment or avoid feeling bad. So the apartment example in New York, I think that's just a good example there. When I shared that apartment in the West Village, everyone's like, you'll never be able to get a neighborhood there or an apartment there. I just remember having a conversation with a good friend who was like, yeah, Kim, that's true. Like, it's really hard. There's like no apartments here. They're really expensive. Like, you probably should look somewhere else, but also like, this is where you want to live. Why wouldn't you at least look and give yourself that option? And that's what I'm talking about. It's like that mindset is, I think, so game changing because what that gave me is literally the permission to do exactly that. And I did find an apartment in that neighborhood. And I remember I had to give myself permission to, in air quotes, start at the top and be like, yeah, this is fine to do. And I get to live here and I get to pay for this and I get to make this work because I've decided. Remember, we just talked about that. But I remember when I went to look for a serving job, and I'm sharing this, so hopefully this makes sense for context in terms of the mindset. I was interviewing and they asked me where I lived, and this is where the name of this mindset comes from. The bartender who was like interviewing me, he's like, oh, just start at the top, why don't you? And it was just so interesting because in my mind, when I heard that, I was like, oh, this is so fascinating. Like, but why wouldn't I if I'm like able to? Because I'm starting in the air quotes top, but I still have so much further I want to grow and expand into. Why wouldn't I at least set my sights on that and start at like the best place I'm able to? Why would I intentionally decide I'm not even allowed to look at that and try to work backwards because that's easier or better or right or more acceptable for someone else? And it was just a really interesting moment. I'm like, this is just so fascinating to me. Like, this is just such an interesting mindset and mentality, and I chose not to work there, and that was one of the reasons. And one of the other reasons was I was like, well, but I'm not starting at the top from a place of expectation. I'm like, hey, I'm going to come into a waitressing job and expect you to pay me $1 million. But also, that was a job where, because I moved from LA to New York City, they wanted me to basically have to redo 10 years of experience to get into like a serving position. And I'm like, no, I get to start with where my experience lands me. And I searched for a job until a place was like, yeah, screw the New York experience you need. You can start at the top, so to say, and make the money you want to serving on the floor. I know this is a serving job example, and maybe not relevant to many of you, but the mindset is the piece I want you to latch on to and to really see. It was that mindset that I think allowed me to put myself in the neighborhood I wanted to live into, the pay the bills job I wanted, that allowed me honestly to break into the advertising industry, that I think allowed me to start my business and feel like I was able to work with clients who are making far, 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 far more money than me and support them to making far more money than me. I think if I came in with this mindset of like, oh no, like I better not do that, like that's not okay, right? I don't know that would have been the case. And I think that mindset changes the game for you. And so I call it the starting at the top mindset because that's what that bartender said, but I want to be really clear there on that nuance. That does not mean I came into New York City or into my business with like, I deserve it and I don't need to like show anyone or like earn my experience or any of that nonsense. Of course, I came into New York and was very quickly humbled and had to learn a lot. And of course, in business, I needed to like learn the ropes and get experience and have integrity. That first client I helped scale to $1 million, I think if I'm remembering correctly, I think she paid me $100 a month. And so I'm sharing that where it's like, yeah, I started at the top, so to say, with my mindset in terms of what I allowed myself, what rooms I allowed myself to put myself into, what spaces, how I allowed myself to show up, not necessarily with like what I was charging or what I was expecting in return. I really hope that difference makes sense, because the last thing I want is now everybody to go out and they're like, I just deserve everything, and we like almost hear this the wrong way. But I do want you to hear what, like, to play with that, where it's like, what if you did allow yourself to start at the top? What does that mean for you? What rooms, so to say, metaphorical rooms, clients you want to work with, spaces you want to be in, coaches you want to work with, masterminds you want to be in, trips you want to take. What spaces are you excluding yourself from because you're not even willing to let yourself think about that, because you think you have to like almost work backwards because you're so worried you're going to get rejected or not be good enough? And what would it look like if you played with like, yeah, like what if I'm just allowed to start at the top and like see what this looks like? Thoughts, questions, reflections, I always want to hear, because I think it's one of those ones I think is a little nuanced, but I think this has helped me in so many ways. I'm going to give one more example of this maybe to help this land. So the other example that pops up with this, when I was working, and this is, I know we're talking about New York, but I think this is helpful to hear in different contexts. When I was working in advertising and I was trying to get those meetings and break in, one of the things I learned, so what I did was I didn't know anyone, right? So I did a lot of cold, really strategic cold reach out to warm people up, to build relationships through email, to like get coffee meetings, and then use those coffee meetings, the relationships I made, to see if they would open doors to introduce me to other people. It's like the snippet of basically my strategy. And I remember the people I reached out to, I started at the top. So what I didn't do, I knew I wanted this job as a rep. And so what I did is I looked for the best agencies, because there's only a handful in the city, and who ran those agencies. And I studied the shit out of who those people were and the work they had done. And I really crafted something very thoughtful and personalized to those people. And what I found is that starting at the top, I think the general advice was like, no, like figure out like what are the easy to reach agencies. Who are the people that are like not at the bottom, top and bottom, like that's such a weird, it seems very hierarchical, I can't say that word, but like who are the people who are just like breaking into the industry that you can message? But I sort of bypassed all of that, right? And I just went to who are the people at the top, because Tim Ferriss talks about this in the 4-Hour Workweek. I think there's a couple things to know about that. One, honestly, the competition is thinner at the top, in terms of there are fewer people who are willing to reach for the top. Yes, they might be more qualified. Like it might be, if there's 5 people instead of 100, it's 5 people who are super, super qualified. But there are usually a lot less people willing to do that. It's the same in acting, right? There's usually fewer people going for the big roles than for like the one-liner. It's, I think, harder to book a one-liner acting, because there's just like, it's so hard to separate yourself. And so the same is true if you're reaching out to people, and in business. I think the competition, simply because I think most people just aren't willing to get the experience or to put in the effort or work that is required to be able to kind of start at the top, to reach out to someone at that level, to compete at that level, to go after something at that level. There are just fewer people there. And so that's just something I think is really helpful to remember here. And that's just an example of why I think this mindset works. I think, yes, I, in air quotes, started at the top in my business and in where I lived in New York City, and even with who I reached out to in the advertising agency. But I, in some ways, think I made it easier on myself, because the truth is, there were only so many people who were actually going to go for those apartments, because everybody else, right? Like there's such a larger pool of people going for the more affordable, easy to get approved on places. Everybody is going for, and we're talking about like breaking into that industry, everybody's going for like the entry level job that like you basically don't need to like differentiate yourself. Very few people, right, are going for this like very specific thing and reaching out to the owner and basically being ballsy enough to like take them out and invite them out to like coffee or lunch or something like that, right? And so like sure, I guess in some ways it's like you could consider that more challenging, but in some ways I think I made it a lot easier on myself. So same for you in business. It's sort of like, what is everybody going after? Because it's like the easier thing to do, and it's like the starting at the bottom, so to say, thing. And again, we're not like bottom top. I don't mean this like one is better than the other, but more just like there's usually just a larger pool of people there, whereas there's usually a much smaller pool of people. Like, sure, it might take a little bit more initial effort, but there's usually a smaller pool of people who are even willing to be the person who's like, yes, I will support you to $1 million, right? Like, and it's not to say this is relevant for everyone watching, but I think just an interesting mindset. Again, remember, this is a mindset more than like, now you need to go make a change in your business or say like, I deserve this, or like scrap all of this. But I think it's just a really interesting mindset to play with. That just allows you to open up more opportunity that I think is in some ways easier for you to achieve. Sarah says, no, I agree. It's harder to book a one-liner than a big part. That's a great way to put it. Thinner comp at the top. Yeah, it's, oh gosh, Sarah, we could talk about this so much. For all of y'all, I know everyone doesn't like want to hear all my, like now I'm going to mix in acting with New York City, but I just will harp on that. It, I think, seems so backwards. When you see actors on TV, for example, and you see someone who has one line, you're like, that's easy. Anyone can do that. But that's why that is so hard to book, because it is easy and anybody can do that, which means the pool that is auditioning for that one role can be anyone and everyone who has ever acted who fits the very broad range of, let's say it's like server who says, do you want a glass of water, right? Whereas the harder, you're like, oh my gosh, they're so talented, how did they do that, roles that are super meaty and have a lot of lines, there just frankly are not only fewer people who can do that role, but fewer people who fit the specifics, because the bigger the role, the more nuanced, the more specific, the more this is it's no longer general, it's specific. And this is so analogous to business, right? If we are generalists and we are speaking to everyone, our brains think it's easier, but that is the hardest place to be, because it could be anyone and everyone. Like, it is so hard to nail a one-line audition and to book it. It is just a lottery. Versus that really meaty, juicy part. Versus if you are an expert and you narrow in and get known for one thing, right? You start at the top where you're an expert of one thing that you do really, really well. Sure, there might be fewer people there, but it is so much easier on you to nail that and to book that. And so it is, Sarah says it's a cattle call versus a private call. 1,000%. And so for you in business, I mean, this is getting into messaging, but this is the whole thing, right? Start at the top. I think thinking about it that way too, where it's like, instead of like, well, this is the easy thing, this is the general. I think that's more the way to think about this. Like, I think it's easier to be a generalist, and like, I got to start here. First, I got to be a generalist, and then I work my way up to being an expert. I literally had this conversation with a client last week. She wrote this beautiful sales page, and we were looking, and I was like, what, is this all the stuff you do? And she's like, well, this is all the stuff I know. And in her mind, that was like, that's the easy thing to do, right? How can I start general and speak to everything I know? And that's essentially starting at the bottom, right? Like, I'm just going to try to appease to everyone, as opposed to, no, I really want the specific compartment. No, I really want to break into the specific job. No, I want to get really known for being good at one thing. That's more starting at the top. And I challenged her. I was like, we gotta cut like 80% of this. I want to know what in this are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you could be the best at, or you are the best at, or that you can really help someone at. And that's all I want us to talk about. That's starting at the top, right? And I think we just all think we have to wait to figure out what that is or to earn that. And I just want to say, no, start there. You make it so much easier on yourself. Okay, let me go to the last one here, because I will just, you know me, I'll just get like super amped up about that. Okay, so the last thing here, which we touched on a little bit in terms of how I made it in New York and how this helped me make it in business, and what you can take for your own business here. And this is really what we were speaking to in terms of why New Yorkers don't consider you a New Yorker until you've lived here 10 years. And the perspective this has really given me, that helped me when I started my business, that's helped me to grow to my first 6 figures, that helped me to then double that helped me to then triple that. And I think it's given me both humility and confidence that served me to sustain multi-6 figures in business. And I think we don't think humility and confidence can live in the same sentence, but I don't think they're the same thing. I think oftentimes the more confident we are, if we're truly confident and not puffed up confidence, we talked about this in another live stream, I think that is where you can have the most humility in many ways. So I really think they can live together. But there's a couple pieces to this. First, it is just really understanding it really is an identity shift, and it simply takes time to become a new version of yourself. And I know this is so just irritating in many ways for most of us who are high achievers and quick learners and who get results really quickly. And I know when I moved to New York, again, when people are like, it takes 10 years to be a New Yorker, I was like, excuse me? Or it takes X amount of time to like really be a business owner, right? I think we're just sort of like, no, I am because I said so. And I think this in some ways almost sounds like it contradicts the first point we were talking about in terms of really deciding and being all in. And what I want to offer is, yes, decide and be all in. And I think, remember, whenever we're making these really big shifts in our life, starting a new business, you want to make 6 figures and sustain that. You want to be $1 million business owner and sustain that. You want to be a New Yorker and sustain that. What we are asking of ourselves is to literally become a new version of ourselves. We are asking ourselves to create a new identity. And this is like crash course on identity. I know we've talked about this in different ways before, but essentially your identity encompasses all of your mindset. It is what sets up the parameters and boundaries for how you live your life, and it is who you see yourself as well as who you teach others who you are. And it is the part of you that allows you to notice and to see opportunity. And it also is the part of you that really fights for congruence. And however you identify as, your subconscious mind works really fucking hard to have your exterior world match up with how you see yourselves. So I think a really simple example is if I identify as a lazy person, and I really believe that, right? That construct is both going to teach me who I am and tell me how I show up. I am a lazy person. I show up as a lazy person. I teach other people this about me. I'm super lazy. So I teach other people to expect that from me. So they reflect that back to me. And then because of this, I also then anything that doesn't match Kim is a lazy person, I am going to work really hard to make sure I don't see or create in my world. So if, let's just say I did have a situation where I wasn't lazy and I was super proactive and made something happen, that would feel very contrary to my brain and to my identity. And our brains do not like that contrast, right? Our brains want congruence with our identity. So that would feel very conflicting to me. And I would do everything possible to either make sure that didn't happen, to sabotage that productivity, to push that away, or to make sure that never happened again, right? Because that is just not who I am. So kind of a silly example, but that's what identity is. So when we're moving to a brand new city like New York, which is it is literally a different way of living in life, right? I don't drive anymore. That's not even a great example. But they say New York is a state, not a state. It's a state of being. It is literally becoming a different version of myself. When you start a business, right? Most of us have not been entrepreneurs before. Unless you've already been a business owner, your identity is probably not as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as a coach. If you've never made a lot of money before, right? Your identity is probably not someone who's a 6-figure business owner, a multi-6-figure business owner, $1 million business owner. These are new identities. So all of that to say is it takes time to create a new identity for all of these reasons, because that means you have a different identity you are shifting out of. And again, that is a part of, that is like, it's like your skin. It is so ingrained. And we have to remember our identity doesn't like that contrast, that congruent. It wants congruent. It doesn't like that contrast. So if you're trying to shift out of that identity and become something new, right, you're working against that. That is a lot of internal resistance and conflict. And so it just takes time for that shift to happen. This is literally the example everybody uses, and I think it's just really appropriate here, is this is why if someone wins the lottery, the stat is that 70% of people will find themselves back within, I think it's 3 years, to their whatever money they previously had or their previously earnings. And it's not because everyone just sucks with money, right? A lot of this has to do with their identity, and they haven't established the identity that can hold the congruence of that much money. And so they behave in a way with the identity they currently have, if they don't change that identity, with someone who is not a lottery winner and super wealthy, as well as will push away anything that is not congruent with how they see themselves, which is probably not as someone who is super wealthy. So same here. So what was, I think, confronting for me when I first moved here is I wanted to be a New Yorker, and I was not yet. And I think that is what was humbling and gave me some humility with that confidence I also had that I can figure shit out and I will make this happen. But I think the reason New Yorkers say it takes 10 years to call yourself a New Yorker is exactly this, because New Yorkers know, sure, it's easy to say you're a New Yorker when you're here on vacation or when it's spring or fall and everything is like beautiful and you like go out to a lovely meal and a show. Like, who the fuck doesn't love New York? It's another thing, like, tell me who you are when sewage lands on your head, after that first winter, after you've paid this rent and taxes for so long, right? Like, tell me who you are after COVID and a pandemic shuts you down and you're in a certain number of square feet and I mean, I won't even go into what COVID was like here, but right, like those are parts of what make your identity and help, I think, you see who you are. And so I think this is why New Yorkers will sometimes eye roll anyone who's like baby Kim in New York. And I think this is the same way sometimes us who have been in business a little longer have to be mindful not to do that to new business owners, because we all started there. We all have to go through that. But I think some of the reason and the perspective I got living here is seeing, oh, this is something I had to become, and I couldn't really become this until there was enough time for that new identity shift, but also until there was enough time for me to see who I was when things weren't just the shiny version of this. Sort of like in business, right? It's one thing to say you have self-trust and you believe in yourself and you're a CEO when it's 2020 and business is booming and you're making all this money and it's super easy. It's another thing. It's like, show me who you are. What's your identity when it's a more challenging year, after you have your first launch that doesn't work out the way you want to, when your marketing isn't bringing in clients with ease, when, like when there are these challenges. I think that's what helps us build that identity. But I think that's also why we have to have that perspective and see there is just a timeline there. It doesn't happen overnight. And it's just something you can't rush that. I'm hoping this makes sense, because I don't want you to hear this as you have to wait a certain number of years in your business to call yourself a business owner. This is not New York City, but I do want you to give yourself, what I'm hoping you're hearing from this is something that's a little bit more permission giving. That is, we're always in the process of becoming more of ourselves, or more of that identity, or more of that CEO, or more of that next level version of ourselves. And the bigger the leap from who we are today to who we want to step into becoming, right? So much of success is who are you becoming, right? You have to be it before you have it. You, as Joe Dispenza says, you have to have a higher level of mind. You have to think and act from that future version of yourself before the results show up, which again is very easy to do when the results are already there and everything's perfect and easy. It's a little harder to do. This is when you really, like, the rubber meets the road, so to say, is when you can do this in advance of. So this is just the case for everyone, and it's just sort of like the bigger the difference from who you are today to who you want to step into, probably just it doesn't always have to be a super long time, but there's just going to be more of an identity shift in terms of who you need to become. And I think just giving yourself grace for that and celebrating that you're always becoming more of that and seeing that as the win, right? It's not like year 2 in New York, I was like, well, screw New York because they don't consider me a New Yorker. I was like, well, I consider me a New Yorker. I just now see the difference 10 years later. But I was also like, I'm just becoming more of a New Yorker. And I love the city that much more. And I'm embracing this challenge. And like, I'm becoming more of a New Yorker every day. I get New York in a whole different way. Like, the public transportation that used to confuse me, now I like know how to get around, no problem, right? All of these things that used to be like the winter that I like didn't know how to navigate coming from Florida and California. Now I'm just like, okay, so I'll just wear like a super warm coat and I like exactly know how to navigate this, no big deal, right? I'm just becoming more of a New Yorker every day. That's what I really hope you'll take from that lesson and apply to your business, where it's not like, oh, great, now I can't consider myself a CEO or successful until. That's not the mindset. It's how can you practice being that person in advance, right? I had to practice being a New Yorker every day for 10 years till I got the like label, till I fully stepped into the identity. Same thing in business, right? Baby Kim in business, year 1, had to absolutely embrace the identity of an entrepreneur and a CEO. And I became more of that every day. And I had to celebrate that, but also give myself grace if what that looked like in year 1 or month 1 wasn't exactly what my mind wanted and what it looks like today and 7.5 years later. I hope that that makes sense in terms of the identity piece. I feel like identity is such a big one, but it is such a, I mean, it's such a big one to talk about, but it's also such a big one in terms of where results come from. I really think who you're being determines your results in and out of business. And I think that is the piece here I'm trying to anchor in. I didn't need to live here 10 years to actually be a New Yorker. I felt like a New Yorker long before then. It is a state of being. And that's the thing. It's not like 10 years and like now magically I'm being a New Yorker. It's just that New Yorkers know it just takes some time to create a new identity. And I think it's the same thing in business, right? All of your results come from who you're being. And who you're being today, your results might not show up today, but they'll show up in the future based on who you're being today. But it sometimes also just takes time for all of us to create that new identity. I'm just seeing here, because I had one other thing I wanted to share with you. I had a couple notes here. I think I harped on that pretty big, but I'll just say the last piece, and then there was one other thought with this. Thank you, Sarah, for saying that. Makes perfect sense. With this whole, there's just a timeline to stepping into a new identity. Again, I do not want you to hear this as like now things are going to have to take forever in your business. That is not what I'm saying. I've literally had clients who have made their first 6 figures in 3 months, and I have a client who's on track for $1 million this year, and I think it's either their second or their third year working with me, which is a pretty short time to be on track for $1 million. And I have clients who've taken longer, right? You know my story. It took me 3 years to make my first 6 figures in business. What I want you to see is almost like the timeline it's like, worry less about me saying this has to take a long or short time, and more, I think, just embracing that it simply takes the time it's going to take. And what it takes is stepping into a new level of mind, stepping into a new level of being, becoming that new identity and version of yourself, and not making yourself wrong or quitting or thinking this means it's not working or it's not going to happen or you're never going to get to be the New Yorker, the $1 million business owner, whatever that result is, because the timeline from your expectation doesn't match what is just simply needed. It just is going to take the time it's going to take. And that's really the piece I just want to anchor in. I think it's sort of like when someone comes to me and bless their heart, they're like pissed that they haven't booked out their business in 1 month. And like, I get the frustration, and I get that there's so many layers underneath that. And I think it's so easy when we're in that to like want to make it about all of these other things. And sometimes it's simply that we haven't given both the strategy enough time to play out, but ourselves enough time to be the kind of person who can execute at a certain level, hold clients at a certain level, hold money in a business at a certain level. And that's just for everyone going to have a different timeline, and really just give yourself a little more grace around that, and to see, instead of like, oh, this isn't working or it's not happening fast enough, I think it's just so much more empowering to embrace, no, look at how much I've grown, look at how much I've become. Year 2 in business, I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this in New York. I remember when I got the job in the advertising agency, this really cool office that was on Fifth Ave. And I remember having this moment, and then like turned out not to be the right job for me. I mean, all the things, right? I obviously have been doing this for a while, but I just remember that was maybe year 2 in New York City, just thinking like, I can't believe this. Like, I'm in New York City. I get to go to Fifth Avenue and go to this really cool penthouse office. And like, I was so embracing that moment and who I was then, even though it wasn't the ultimate. And that's what I want you to hear from this too, is how can you, if you're in your first year of business, or if you're in your 10th year of business, but you're stepping into that next level, how can you also just so embrace, yes, there might be timeline to stepping into becoming what's next, but also how can you so embrace who you've stepped into in the time you have been in business and that experience and what that's giving you. I think that will propel you forward. This is a whole different conversation and not one of my points. I was talking about this with my husband yesterday. I think I'm particularly skilled at gratitude. I am one of the most annoyingly obnoxious, grateful humans I know. In fact, I tell my clients to practice obnoxious gratitude. I am like obnoxiously grateful, but I mean it so sincerely, and I think it's one of my secrets. And it is a little bit what we're talking about here. Instead of making yourself wrong with all of this and giving yourself grace and compassion, how can you just have so much gratitude and celebrate the ever-living shit out of exactly where you are, even if it's not where you want to be next? And I really think that's part of what helped me make it in New York and love the journey enough to stick around for 10 years and now be in a position where I live in this luxury loft Dumbo dream apartment with a dream husband and a dream business and a dream like all of the things, but that's also because of the shit water on my head when that happened. I was like, cool, New York, bring it. Like, this is such an adventure. How do we figure stuff out? I'm so grateful for this opportunity and experience. And the same in business. I think I have some obnoxious gratitude there. I literally could pull up conversations with my coach in so-called like lower income months where I'm like, I'm so grateful for this. I'm so grateful for every dollar I've made. I'm so grateful for the clients who pay me. I'm so grateful for like, this was the best month ever because of like all these things I learned, all these ways I like stepped into becoming, literally I've probably said this, like to becoming more like of a better coach or a better CEO. And so I offer that to you because I think that part more than probably anything has served me in everything I do. So play with some obnoxious gratitude, see how that can work for you. I swear it's game changing. But also that obnoxious gratitude with that humility or that perspective or that expectation that things can be both so great in the moment and you can be becoming someone new, and that it might also simply just take time to step into that fully formed identity or like that like ultimate thing that you're trying to achieve. And like, how can you hold space for both to be true and both to be right? I think that's just like it's a duality we sometimes have a hard time with, where it's like, how can I make the 2 years into business where I'm struggling to have enough extra money to pay for a cup of coffee, how can I make that so right? And I'm not a New Yorker yet, and I'm not a successful business owner yet, right? How can I hold that and be so grateful for that and who I've become in the last 2 years and just embrace the ever-living shit out of that, and also hold that it's okay that it might take me a little bit more to step into who I need to become to reach my ultimate, and that's also on the way, and I've decided that I'm on the, like, how can we hold both of that? That's the game. That's the balancing act we're playing. There was one last thing, and this was last nugget with that I wanted to share, and then I'll wrap this up for real, because I keep saying one more thing and then I have another thing. But the last piece with that, and I alluded to this earlier, but I really wanted to speak to this, and this goes along with the gratitude a little bit as well. And I was literally talking about this with a new client yesterday. We were talking about self-trust and things in fear and things in business. And I think this came up earlier in our conversation. And what I was reflecting to her and what I want to reflect to you is, and I think this all goes with like what helped me make it in New York, what helped me make it as a multi-six-figure business owner, what's going to help you in business to make it. It's really easy to have self-trust when there are no challenges, when everything is going the way you want to, when you're booking clients, when things feel easy, when you just had a great launch, when you're making six or multi-six figures, when the sun is shining outside in New York City and it's not a hot fucking mess that New York City can be, right? It's super easy to trust yourself and be like, I made the right decision. I'm a New Yorker, I'm a successful business owner. I trust myself. I'm going to make these moves, right? Like, and that's beautiful. And I want that for you. But show me who you are when it's a little stretchy, when you look at that first apartment, you're like, what the fuck did I do? When shit water falls on your head, when the first client defaults their payment, when you're not sure, when you can't see on paper that your business is working and you don't see where the next payment is coming from, but you make that investment in that coach anyway, or you double down on your marketing anyway, or you show up and sell anyway, right? Show me who you are in those moments. That's what self-trust is, right? That's the identity shift we're talking about. That's your opportunity to step out of who you used to be and to step into more of who you're becoming as a CEO or as a New Yorker in this case. And so I just want you to hold that too, because I think we see online, we talk a lot about self-trust, we talk a lot about deciding, we talk a lot about these concepts that are so important, but then we see them married with like the end result. And sometimes I think we miss the nuance that self-trust and who you're becoming and stepping and owning in your power and all of these concepts, right? Deciding. right? All of these things are one thing when you already have the result, but when you can do those things before you actually have concrete evidence that things are working out and that you're going to be who you want to be and that you're going to get what you want to get, like that's the magic, right? That is what transforms you. That is what transforms your life, because that's what's required, right? We have to have the self-trust. We have to make the decision. We have to lean in. We have to do the scary things before the result comes, right? Like we have to step into that. That's what allows you to become the person who then creates all the results they want. Otherwise, it is just a fluke. And then, sure, you can come on vacation somewhere. Sure, you could have like a pop month and someone can pay you in full, but then it is going to feel like a fluke, because everything that's required to sustain that hasn't been built up. So I offer that, and I offer that also as a way to reframe when maybe things feel stickier. Literally, this is like, I'm gonna sound like a masochist. But when things are stickier in my business, when things have been stickier in New York, when things are more challenging, that is when I whip out the obnoxious gratitude. I'm like, this is so great. Like, this is literally helping me become more of a New Yorker. This is helping me become a better business owner. This is helping, like, all of this is going to help me become a millionaire. I literally see everything as something that is in service of either giving me that right now or strengthening me to set me up to be able to have that. And so it just helps me to step into that instead of to resist those changes. Okay. I hope that was helpful. Thank you also for celebrating with me, because this was also self-indulgent for me, because I got to talk about New York City, and it is a big deal for me. If you are a New Yorker, I think you'll probably get this. I think if you're not a New Yorker, it can feel a little bit like, I don't get the big deal. But the best way I can, for those of you who are like, I don't really get the New York angle, Kim, but I get the like business side thing, I would just say this is the equivalent to if you've been in business for any length of time, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. I think there's just something where you're just like, wow, like this just feels like I've just become such a different person, and it just feels like such a big deal, but also something that at one point was such an idea and such a like, can I do this? And then to be on, I mean, I'll be in New York for a long time, but to sort of be on that other side, we're like 10 years and a week ago, I was in LA wondering, well, I had decided then, so maybe like 10 years and a month ago, I was in that place, and New York City was a dream, and I had come on vacation. It was literally an idea, and to see how that plays out, I think is something really special, and that's what we do as entrepreneurs. And I think it's just a nice, I don't know, for me, it feels a little selfish and indulgent, but I hope it's also a nice reminder for all of you. Like, there was a point where your business was just an idea. It was just this, like, could I do this thing? And then you decided and you took action. And I think that's just something really special for all of us to celebrate, and to also, as a reminder for, like, just the shit you can make happen, and how you really can become a different version of yourself and a different identity. And that doesn't mean your past identity was wrong or bad. My LA identity was not wrong. My acting identity was not wrong. Kim, who worked in advertising, that's not like that was, it's just every stage of life and thing we do just requires a different identity. And again, the bigger the goal, usually the higher level of mind and self we need to step into. So I hope this was helpful for you, or at least fun for you. Thank you for hanging with me. Reminder, if you commented, you'll be entered to win that free coaching session. You can still catch the replay for the masterclass, The Path to Consistent 10K Months, until October 11th in the group. It will get pulled down. We might turn it evergreen, but I cannot promise that. And if you were interested in coaching with me, we have limited spots available through the end of December. We'll start booking for January after that, but we'll first fill up. We've got some October, November, December spots. They're booking up. But if you book a consultation with me or free call by October 11th and decide to move forward, you will get $250 off either a coaching intensive or your first month in my 6-month coaching partnership. And again, this is not me doing the marketing thing. It is just simply true. I have not offered this in about 4 years. I don't know if I will again. So it is a really good time. If you're looking for support, if you're hearing what I'm talking about, you're like, I would like to step into my CEO identity and role, and I want someone who can support me with that and hold me to the fire. My clients will tell you I am the most loving, supportive coach, but I will also lovingly hold you to the fire and really challenge you to step into thinking like a CEO and stepping into that next level of being. And I really will challenge you on that. Similarly, if you're hearing some of this and you're like, oh, like I know, you talked a little bit about not being a generalist, and I would like to be a specialist, and I could use some help with my positioning and my marketing and selling. And like you talked a lot about money, Kim, and I would like to make some money consistently in my business. I've decided that's mine. That is also what I support my clients with. So hit me up. I would love to support you, and I would love for you to take me up on that special until it goes away. And then I'll be back next week. We'll have another fun conversation for y'all. I think next week I could tell y'all. I think next week is content, or the week after is content. We've got some good topics coming up. I know because we backed them out in advance. I will see you then. I love you all. Bye.